Zero is my hero.
Welcome to the adventures of Math Girl. With the help of Pocket Ronnie, you also can become a trusty sidekick of Math Girl like Kid Calculus and the Daring Derivative.
But till you came along, we counted on our fingers and toes.
Okay, we're going to be doing coin problems. If we're looking at 28C, 1 and 2, I've basically summarized the problem. You have 27 coins, and those coins are made up of nickels and pennies. The value of the money is 75 cents, and the question is, how many of each kind do you have? How many nickels do you have, and how many pennies do you have? In these coin problems, you're going to have two unknowns. Nickels, the number of nickels, and the number of pennies. So when you have two unknowns, you have to have two equations. So the equations that we're going to write are, the first equation is going to be, I call it, how many? How many coins do you have? Well, I'm just going to pick N for nickels and P for pennies. So my first equation is the number of nickels I have plus the number of pennies I have equals 27 coins. So I call that equation how many. This is your how many equations. Your nickels plus your pennies equals 27 coins. Well, we have two unknowns, so we have to have a second equation. So the second equation is going to be your value, to tell you the value of your money. Well, how much is a nickel worth? 5 cents. So how do we write 5 cents? 0.05. So for every nickel we have, we're going to have 5 cents times every nickel we have. So I'm going to write as 0.05 N. For every penny I have, that's 1 cent, that's 0.01. So for every penny, 0.01 times the number of pennies equals, that we were told in our problem that the value of our coins is 75 cents. So I have two unknowns and I have two equations. On my second equation, I can get rid of my decimals by multiplying everything by 100. So if I multiply everything by 100, then I can get rid of my decimals. So then this equation becomes 5. It moves my decimal over twice for each one of those. Okay, so this just becomes 5n plus 1p equals 75. This equation did not change. It stayed the same. So now I have two equations and two unknowns. You can either use substitution or elimination to solve these problems. It's going to be easier if you use elimination. In elimination, they're in standard form and you stack them one on top of the other. I have all of my n's lined up, I have all of my p's lined up, and I have all of my whole numbers lined up. But when I eliminate, I'm going to add these equations together. I'm going to add. Right now, if I added them together, nothing would eliminate or go away. So, but I can look at, this is a plus sign, I want one of my variables to go away. You can pick either one to eliminate. I'm going to pick to eliminate my p's because here I have a 1p and there I have a 1p. If this was a negative, then a negative 1 plus a positive 1 would be 0. So if I multiplied this by negative 1, then that would become a negative 1. Well, if you multiply this by negative 1, you have to multiply everything by negative 1. Okay? So jumping down here, my new top equation would be negative 1n plus or minus 1p, that became a plus a negative 1, equals negative 27. I didn't change my bottom equation, I only changed my top equation so that I could eliminate them. Okay, now when I add them together, you can see that that's like a 1, negative 1, my p's will eliminate. So I have a negative 1 and a positive 5, which would be a positive 4n. 75 minus 27, 48. Solving for n, divide each side by 4. So n should be 12. So the number of nickels that I'm going to have is 12. So now I can take that and substitute it back into one of the original equation. This one is going to be your easiest equation to substitute it into. So if I have 12 nickels, then I can solve for however many pennies I have because the two of those added together should be 27. So that means I have 15 pennies. Subtracting the 12 over to the 27. Okay, now we're looking at 28E, 1 and 2. So this problem says I have 14 coins and they're made up of dimes and quarters. The value of the coins is $2.30 and I want to know how many of each kind do I have. So again, I have two unknowns, dimes and quarters, so I have to write two equations. If you have two unknowns, you have to have two equations. My first equation that I'm going to write is how many. So I'm going to use D for dimes and Q for quarters. So my dimes plus my quarters has to equal 14 coins. I was told that I have 14 coins. The second equation I'm going to write is the value. Okay, this just comes from, the value of each of these comes from your knowledge, and then the total value of all the coins comes from the problem. Okay, the value of each dime is 10 cents. So for every dime that I have 10 cents times every dime, plus 25 cents times every quarter that I have. And then they told me in the problem that the total value of all the coins was $2.30. Okay, so I can get rid of my decimals. I don't want to usually work with decimals, so I can get rid of my decimals by multiplying by 100. When you want to move your decimal two places, you multiply by 100, 2 zeros. Multiplying by 100 moves your decimal place over 2. With all these money problems, you're going to be always working with two decimal places because money is in two decimal places. So this new equation, moving all my decimals over and not having decimals, will be 10D plus 25Q equals 230. I did not change my top equation, but I'm going to write my equations one on top of the other so that they're all stacked. D's, Q's, whole numbers. Because then I can use elimination to get rid of one of my variables. When you use elimination, you're adding them, and so then you can choose which variable you want to get rid of. So I'm going to eliminate my D's. Well, if I have a positive 10D here, what does this need to be in order for it to be 0? It needs to be a negative 10D. Well, if I'm going to multiply this by a negative 10, I have to multiply everything by a negative 10. So now my new top equation will be negative 10D minus 10Q equals a negative 140. My bottom equation, I didn't change that. Okay, now I am adding these to eliminate. A negative 10D and a positive 10D goes away, so that way I just have one variable left and I can solve for Q. A negative 10 and a positive 25, positive 15, Q, and then negative 140 and 230 is going to be a positive 90. Divide both sides by 15, so I can solve for Q. So the number of quarters I'm going to have is 6. By the way, you should end up with whole numbers for these answers. You should not end up with a decimal. I can't have 6.2 quarters. I can only have whole numbers, and I should also have positive numbers. I'm not going to have a negative number of quarters. So now to solve for my number of dimes, remember we were told that dimes plus quarters equals 14. So if I know that I have 6 quarters, then the number of dimes I'm going to have is 8. Because 8 plus 6 is 14. So always make sure that the number of dimes you have, the number of coins, equals the total coins you should have. 6 plus 8 is 14. Another way you can check it, in the problem, we were told that we have a total of $2.30. Well, if I have 6 quarters would be $1.50, and then 8 dimes would be 80 cents. So that's 13, and that's $2.30. So you can always add up the value of the money and make sure it adds up to the value that they tell you.